We're back now. Woo. Sorry, I'm a little blurry. That should correct here in a second. Anyway, so we were talking about taxes and stuff and where we should focus our energy as a country. And, I have a little clip from Jon Stewart. This is an older clip on taxes. So we're going to start with him to entertain us and realize how much better he is as a scriptwriter than we are. Or at least his scriptwriters are than we are.
Americans can't make a buck without Uncle Sam reaching his dirty little paw down our pants. We pay federal taxes, state taxes, property taxes, tax on gas, alcohol, cigarettes, diapers, tampons, clams. There's even a tax on sound effects. Oh, yeah. It sounded like an ocean liner just came. I don't know. We got to be the most taxed people in the world. What do we got there? Really? 8% is the average tax burden in the United States of America? That can't be right. Point is this, it's low. Lower than you'd think. So, I mean, if we're mad, those 38% paying meatball-eating scandies must be absolutely outraged.
I love to pay my taxes.
Det är lite i hög, men det är bra alltså.
I pay because I think the system works.
Yeah, I like paying taxes.
From your lighthouse in an Ingmar Bergman movie? By the way, that gentleman is now available at IKEA. He's called a Skernbergen.
So that brings us to it. They're paying quadruple, more than that. And they don't complain about it. They like to pay their taxes.
You know what? I want to jump in on that from personal experience when, because I'm Scandinavian,
Right.
I have never lived in Scandinavia, but I have family members there whom I have gone to visit. And I've had this discussion with them before. And, well, none of them jumped up and down and,
No.
had glee about their taxes per se. They were all like, oh, yeah, our taxes are fine. We get a lot of stuff, They were like, things here are really good. So
But
it's fine.
But that's why. Is they
Right.
get stuff for it. And he's going to get into that here. I mean, that's the crux, is they get stuff for it.
Yeah, but my point is also, though, that they didn't just, find the 3 okay people with it on the street.
No.
My experience from speaking to family members literally in Sweden was that it was not perceived as much of a problem.
Right. Well, and statistically, most of them don't care. They think it's fine. They have no problem. They think it's fine.
It was fine.
Yeah, so he'll get into that here in a second.
But these folks bring up an interesting point. They seem pleased to pay taxes because their system is working. Why?
We don't have to worry about getting sick. We don't have to worry about insurances.
Daycare for kids, free school.
When you go give birth, it's almost free.
Things in Finland's government-issued baby box that just make sense. All the pads for your new leaking body. Condoms so you don't pop out another one right away.
They get a fuck box? You go to Finland, you get a taxpayer-funded fuck box? Although I guess, to be fair, any box could be a fuck box if you're...
Yeah, he should just have stopped right there. I mean,
What was that?
he should have just stopped right there before the any box could be a fuck box.
Yeah, well, I made it as a comedy show, so he's gotta milk it. But
Gotta push that line a little.
Yeah, but you gotta get into the real point is daycare is free. Imagine if you said that to a parent here in the United States. Free daycare. They would lose their shit. Do you know how much daycare is? I mean, daycare is more than most people's rent.
Listen, there's a person in my life that literally cannot go back to work, even though that would be her preference. She would prefer to be a working parent rather than a stay-at-home parent. But she literally could not manage to earn enough even to fund the daycare bill for her children.
Right.
You know, she has more than one child that is of the age that would need daycare, and she said it would only make sense if I literally had one child, and even then it toes the line because that's so expensive in the city that I live in.
Oh yeah.
More than one kid, forget it. It wouldn't make sense.
Well, think about that. So that's one, huge savings right there from your taxes. Two, you talk about all their medical insurance. It's covered by the government. Do you get sick, you just go to the hospital. And there's no bill. Most of their colleges are free. You know? You think about all the things that are burdening the average American. You think about that, like we just talked about, child poverty has spiked in this country because these kids can't get food. Not a problem in Sweden and Norway.
And let's pull the string on how that relates to the education thing. So if you could get your college education either free or so heavily subsidized that it's virtually free,
Yeah.
You could exit high school and go become a nurse without a bunch of saddling debt. And if you become a nurse, you think that your children are going to be in poverty?
No.
No. And was it maybe you have to be super smart to become a nurse, obviously, smart enough to be able to get through all of it, but would you be held back because you're like, geez, I don't know if I can afford to actually go and do that?
Right.
Let alone how hard it is to go through nursing school. No, you just have to say, do I think I could do all these classes? Yes. Am I interested in doing them? Yes. Okay, and go. Right?
Right. It's just a question of, am I willing to do the work?
Right.
And then if I do
not whether I can even actually manage to foot the bill and not end up in crippling debt because of it.
Right. Now I'm in a better position to buy a house, buy a car.
And to have children that I can actually afford to support and keep working, even if I have more than one child back to back, because I can actually put them in a safe and healthy environment, right?
Right. And I'm not in this constant fear of, I'm going to lose my job and be in crippling poverty. Right. Or I'm going to get injured and be in crippling poverty. Right. Or I'm going to have an unexpected pregnancy and I'm going to have to lose my job to stay home with the kids.
Right.
It's amazing. So, of course, I can see where you'd sit there and go, well, yeah, I don't mind paying my taxes because what I pay, I get more back. Right. It's that whole thing when they pushed the Medicare for all stuff and everybody kept asking, well, what would that increase taxes by? And they kept trying to explain, well, it would increase taxes, sure, but what you'd be saving would be a lot more than what you'd be paying. Because right now, and that's the thing that's so hard to sell to people, which is like, right now, you're paying whatever, even if you're getting it through your work, which most people do. Only about half of us do get it through work that are working. And even then, you're paying $400 or $500 a month for a decent plan. If you have kids, especially, you could be up to close to $1,000, right? Well, if you're paying an extra $5,000 a year in tax, then you're only paying $300 or $400 a month, but you don't have to. But it covers everything. You don't have to worry about it, right? But it probably wouldn't be that high in tax because it'd be a percentage. It wouldn't be a flat fee. So, I mean, it's just simple things where, once again, our whole thing with where are your priorities at? Are the priorities, I want lower taxes, I don't want to pay taxes, or are my priorities, I would like to live in a wealthier economy? Because if I want to live in a wealthier economy, we got to pay taxes so everybody gets that equal chance. And they don't have to worry about going into poverty. And so, I mean, Judd Stewart makes a good point on all that, but I think it's interesting because a lot of Americans don't get that. And we're going to skip here a little bit because he goes right into that. real quick. I think this is it.
For money are singing a different tune.
If you're diabetic, your prescriptions are free, so I don't have to pay for it anyway.
On a de belles routes, on a accès à une certaine éducation, un système de santé qui est excellent.
The children get free medical care. There is no extra charge, whether for regular checkups, for treatments, or for prescription medicine.
Wow, it's amazing what you can pay for when you haven't been allowed to have an army. Now,
but he makes the point, where are your priorities?
So, Duncan, this reminded me. I have a random question for you.
Sure.
Do you remember roughly how much you paid the last time you had to buy like a container of Tylenol or aspirin, something of that sort?
I honestly, I don't. It's been a while, but
so I mean, probably depending on the size of the container, probably a solid $10 at least, right?
Yeah, probably, yeah. Depending on what it was, yeah.
Well, I was in the UK recently, and I needed to pick some up. I didn't travel with any, or I ran out and I needed some, and I just popped into a pharmacy and I bought a box of Tylenol. I looked at the price and I was like, wait, what?
Ooh.
So I bought two because it was 49 pence, half a pound.
Jeez.
I bought two. I was like, I spent a pound on 2 boxes of it.
Yeah,
And they weren't very large. There weren't like a lot of pills in it. I think it was maybe 16 pills each, or I don't know, something like that. But the price was so ridiculously reasonable, and I was like, and it made me stop. And I've always thought the price of drugs in the U.S. was pretty crazy.
Ridiculous.
But I stopped. I was like, why on God's green earth, for just like your average like headache medicine, over the counter headache medicine, are we spending so freaking much money?
Right.
You go to the UK and like I could buy 2 boxes of this stuff for a pound.
Right. Well, I think the problem too is people misunderstand what taxes are and what they're for. And so here's a theory, and some of you might disagree with this, but this is modern monetary theory. So this is Dr. Stephanie Kelton. And we sort of talked about this last time, but I thought I'd get into it a little bit here. So she's going to explain a little bit of what it is, and then we can get into some more detail.
An unconventional economic theory is gaining some traction thanks to the policy teams of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders.
I think the first thing that we need to do is break the mistaken idea that taxes pay for 100% of government expenditure.
My critics say, Bernie, that's a great idea. You're into all this free stuff. How you gonna pay for it?
So MMT starts with a simple observation, and that is that the US dollar is a simple public monopoly. In other words, the United States currency comes from the United States government. It can't come from anywhere else. So what that means is that the federal government is nothing like a household. In order for households or private businesses to be able to spend, they've got to come up with the money, right? And the federal government, it can never run out of money. It cannot face a solvency problem, bills coming due that it can't afford to pay. It never has to worry about finding the money in order to be able to spend.
So there's
bringing a new roommate to save money.
That's all I wanted to get her to really say, but it's a simple concept. And the guy who came up with it was a finance guy, and basically this is the story. Is he initially had, with his kids, he would say, okay, if you do, mow the lawn or clean your room or whatever, I'll pay you 3 of my business cards. I'll give you to do that. Well, of course, his kids didn't do any of that, 'cause why do they care if he gives them 3 business cards, right? Then what he said was, I'll tell you what, you all owe me 10 business cards at the end of each month. Right? And the only way to earn business cards is to get them from me for doing chores. So I issue the cards. I issue the currency. You work for the currency, right? Well, now all of a sudden his kids want to do chores. They want to earn business cards because it buys them through the month. So if they have extra cards, they don't have to do any chores. So what has he done? He's created his own currency within his house that he controls, and he can issue as much of it as he wants. Right? Now there are issues with that in a government system like ours, where you don't want to get inflation out of control and things like that. But the goal is that the understanding is we're not paying taxes because the taxes are used to pay for stuff, because the government issues the money. It can print as much money as it wants at any point. Right? We're paying taxes because if we don't pay taxes, there's no incentive to work within the system. And the government only accepts US dollars. You can't pay your US taxes with the pound. You can't pay it with the euro. You can't pay it with the yen. You have to pay it with US money. And because we're the most powerful government, we have the most powerful economy, what is everybody else's currency compared to? The US dollar. Right? So I always do the joke about it because it was 9/11 recently happened, but it's not really a joke. It's just a fact. I mean, bin Laden said it clearly. That's where the US power lies. That's why he targeted the World Trade Center. Because our power is not our military. It's the fact that we control the value of everything. Right? And the way we do it is through taxes. Now, does it matter if you tax this amount or that amount? No, but everybody needs to be taxed something in order to keep them in the system, right? So what does taxes really do? It really comes down to what are our priorities? And what's happened in this government is, in this country is, now if you're really wealthy, right, you're in a position to buy off politicians or to get your voice heard more, and then they vote for the stuff you want. The government itself doesn't care about the money. It's the bank. It can never go bankrupt, just like a monopoly. It's in the rules. The bank can never go bankrupt. Right? But that's the whole point, is it's kind of a shell game that gets played here. Right? So what I think is interesting is we'll go to this. So this was a clip from about 4 years ago, and this was at Davos. And this is the majority part with Sam Cedar. And this is really interesting because a couple professors sort of pointed this out at Davos, and it ends up kind of backfiring on the rich people at Davos and the reporters there. But this is pretty funny.
This panel, and it's a Washington Post panel. The reporter is Heather Long. She just does like a general beat. She's an she is Chiron here as an economics correspondent for the Washington Post. And I just want everybody to sort of sit with that for a moment and imagine what the baseline knowledge of the United States economy and just the things like the history of the economy, basic stuff, basic, just knowledge of how the tax system works, just very basic overview. She is doing this panel. On it is this guy, is Michael Dell from Dell Computers, right? And this guy from MIT named Eric Rinjolson. He is the director of MIT's initiative on the digital economy. And so here's the exchange. She asks a question. They get a big laugh because the idea of actual, tax regime is hilarious. But listen to where this goes.
There are growing calls to address these inequalities, particularly the wage inequality, with more taxes. In particular, in the United States, there's been a call by Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez to tax people earning over $10 million at a 70% tax rate. The current top rate in the United States is 37%. Michael Dell, do you support this?
I just want to say I'm thrilled that they're asking.
Wow. Well, look, I mean, my wife and I set up a foundation about 20 years ago.
Pause it. I just love the fact that he can't even joke around. Like, they're all laughing, and he immediately goes to the talking points that that like he goes into defense mode.
And can we just say that Bill Gates, who's more classy and less, I mean, I hate Bill Gates, but he's less of like an obvious moron than Michael Dell, made exactly the same point.
About 20 years ago, and we would have contributed quite a bit more than a 70% tax rate on my income, on my annual income. And I feel much more comfortable with our ability as a private foundation to allocate those funds than I do giving them to the government.
Of course you do.
All right.
So no, I'm not supportive of that.
Jeez, for fuck's sake.
I know. I don't know. I would rather I distribute my money however I want than have to pay taxes and have you give it to poor children or something. I'd rather give it to people that are going to cut my taxes. Right? Which is what he's done.
Oh my God, I can't even, right?
But that's what they always do. I give more to charity, but it's like which charities? A lot of them are charities that are going to cut your taxes. They're lobbying firms and things like that. So anyway, this is where this gets funny.
Right.
Because his whole point is, well, I give out more in charity. Well, not really, because you get to take deductions and all that crap. But this is where this starts to get funny. And everybody kind of ends up eating it.
I think it would help the growth of the U.S. economy.
Oh, that's interesting. And can you say a little bit more about why you don't think it would?
I'll name a country where that's worked ever.
Oh.
This economy.
Oh, that's interesting. And can you say a little bit more about why you don't think it would?
I'll name a country where that's worked ever.
United States.
Briefly in the 80s.
No. All right, pause it for a second. No, pause it for a second.
Okay, so they're going to pause it and laugh about this, but we got to pause it too. So that was the MIT professor on the sideline. And he said, well, name a country where that's worked, where the effective highest tax rate was 70%. Name a country where that's ever worked. And the guy from MIT says the United States. And she says, oh, well, briefly in the 80s. Now, he's about to correct her because the top marginal tax rate in the United States was over 70% for most of the 20th century. So the top earners were paying over that. And in fact, in the 50s and I think the 60s at some point, in the 50s, it was close to 90%. So basically, when Ocasio-Cortez says, let's go back to 70%, she's not even going back to the highest marginal tax rate it used to be. But this woman, of course, Michael Dell doesn't know that because he's an idiot, but this woman is supposed to be the economic correspondent for the Washington Post, and she doesn't know that. So let's watch them. They're going to laugh about this a little bit, but this is ridiculous.
First off, she is completely stumped by his challenge. Name a country where it's worked. In addition to having no further really follow-up. This is an economics correspondent for arguably the second most important newspaper in the country. I don't know where it would rank internationally, but a fairly important paper that internationally as well. An economics correspondent, probably not the economics correspondent. And she says for a short time in the 80s. Now,
when Reagan knocked it up, he whacked it up to 80%.
The top marginal tax rate starting in 1936 through till 1982 was never below 70%. The highest was in the 90s, and that was for over 10 to 15 years. It was in the high 80s from like 36 to 50. Maybe hitting 90 occasionally.
These reporters just worship the orthodoxy of the current economy.
These reporters don't have Google.
Yeah.
They don't like. They don't like. Hey, I'm going and I am the economics correspondent for the Washington Post, and I'm going to ask Michael Dell about these tax rates. Yeah. I wonder what the tax rates have been in this country that I am an economics correspondent for, in the second most important.
What are the magic features of the modern economy that you're always writing like dumb like tributes to in the Washington Post is Google.
It's
You could have used a Dell computer.
Exactly. You use a Dell computer, and then you go to Google, and then you discover how to not embarrass
There's just
yourself.
something fundamentally wrong with everything. That this basic level of competency when you head into it's just mind blowing.
But you know what it is, guys. I think some more interesting ideas.
It's ideas. But wait a second. So fortunately, they have I guess you need to be a professor at MIT to know this.
Okay, so they're going to get back to the professor here because he explains the same thing.
To the U.S. economy.
Oh, that's interesting. And can you say a little bit more about why? Why you don't think it would?
Well, name a country where that's worked ever.
United States.
Briefly in the 80s.
No. From about the 1930s through about the 1960s, the tax rate averaged about 70%. At times it was up as high as 95%. And those were actually pretty good years for growth. So I don't have a strong opinion on that proposal. A lot of the devil is in the details. But I think there's actually a lot of economics that suggests that it's not necessarily going to hurt growth.
Yeah. Yep. There you go. Well,
you know what? I kind of hope the Washington Post was paying attention to the lack of knowledge their correspondent actually had, because that makes them look really stupid.
Oh, and especially at Davos. Now, the thing about it, though, is that it's, once again, it's what we were talking about, is priorities, right? So when the tax rates were that high, what the concept was is, well, no, you just, if you're making with the equivalent of $5 million today, right, or $10 million, that's just your civic duty. It was a different thought process back then. You just paid it. Nobody really complained about it. It wasn't like people were rioting about the taxes back then. They just paid it, right? And the concept was, well, it was part of the general concept of the United States, which is we don't want to have a landed gentry in this country, which is why we have a state tax. We don't want to have royalty in this country. But that all changed in the 80s under Reagan, which is the trickle-down theory, which now we do. We have billionaires. They can just put their finger on the system. Right? They can just go walk into the White House or Congress and tell them what they want. Right? You never really had that before. Well, here is a Dutch historian, and we're going to play this last part of this video. But here's a Dutch historian the next day in Davos talking about this. And this was really amazing.
One of those comments that indicts everybody for being on stage.
This is my first time at Davos, and I find it quite a bewildering experience, to be honest. I mean, 1,500 private jets have flown in here to hear Sir David Attenborough speak about, how we're wrecking the planet. And I hear people talk in the language of participation and justice and equality and transparency. But then, almost no one raises the real issue of tax avoidance, right? And of the rich just not paying their fair share. It feels like I'm at a firefighters conference and no one's allowed to speak about water, right? there was only one panel, actually.
Well, we've had two. You're the second of our panelists.
There was only one panel.
Let's go there.
One panel hidden away in the media center that was actually tax avoidance. I was one of the 15 participants. So something needs to change here. 10 years ago, the World Economic Forum asked the question, what must industry do to prevent a broad social backlash? The answer is very simple. Just stop talking about philanthropy and start talking about taxes. Taxes. We need. Just 2 days ago, there was a billionaire in here. What's his name? He asked the question like, name me one country where a top marginal tax rate of 70% has actually worked. Mm-hmm. And I'm a historian. The United States. That's where it has actually worked. In 1950s, during Republican President Eisenhower, the war veterans, the top marginal tax rate in the U.S. was 91% for people like Michael Dell. The top estate tax for people like Michael Dell was more than 70%. This is not rocket science. We can talk a very long time about all these stupid philanthropy schemes. We can invite Bono once more, but come on, we got to be talking about taxes. That's it. Taxes. All the rest is bullshit, in my opinion.
And that was the last time he was ever seen at Davos. But he's right. We got to start talking about taxes and where are our priorities. And the understanding is that by raising taxes, it's not doing it because we're paying for stuff. We're doing it because we're trying to keep the playing field even. Because when you don't, what ends up happening is you end up having a royal class. And a lot of the pressure, and I know with Republicans and stuff for that is, look, if you're already rich, you don't want to talk about taxes. Right? But if you're poor, you should be wanting to talk about taxes. If you're middle class, you should want to be talking about raising taxes because you're the one that's going to benefit. Right? But they get all these people convinced that no, raising taxes is bad. It's like, no, it's actually good. Because you won't have to pay for all this shit anymore.
Right.
Or you could just trust that Michael Dell and Bill Gates and all those guys will start a charity foundation for you.
And what they choose to do with that money is definitely going to help you.
Absolutely, because that's what they care about.